Welcome to Tuesday Talks, your educational podcast helping parents become strong advocates for their kids and teachers to make big impacts in the classroom. Here we go. Hey. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another Tuesday Talks. If you're just joining me for the first time, thank you so much. And if you are a returning listener, I sincerely appreciate your time joining me each week as we talk about all things education. And for today's episode, I'm really focusing on my parents of infants and my daycare providers. And honestly, anyone who's ever looked at a baby and wondered, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? I know they're a baby, but are they progressing how they should be progressing? So, today we're talking about speech and language development from birth to 12 months of age. If you have a kid older, like toddler age, be sure to check out my episode earlier this season where I talked about those developmental milestones for ages 2 through 5, which are really important because you're leading up to kindergarten. And then we know all the things can happen when kids enter kindergarten and they're tested during that first week of school. The social norms change, the attention time length changes, all of those things. So be sure to check that episode out. But today we're going to talk about what to look for in our babies birth to 12 months of age. What's typical, and most importantly, what can you do every single day to support your baby through play? And you heard that right. It's through play. And I'm going to give you really practical ways at the end of this episode to play with your baby without feeling like you need to carve out this special time to sit on the blanket, on the floor with them. Everything's perfect. Get out the toys. No. Because we know life is busy, and language and speech development is really incorporated into everything that we do every day. So I'm going to share ways to incorporate that play with your baby in natural ways through things that you're doing every day. So let's get into it. So first, I want to ground ourselves before we jump into milestones. And if you've heard that term developmental milestones before, or if you haven't, I should say, you might be thinking, what does that mean? So developmental milestones are just those markers that research has showed that kids need to be doing certain things at certain age ranges. Remember, there's no magic that happens at a specific age, but there are ranges of ages where things should be developing or should have developed. So those developmental milestones are going to be those markers that we want to pay attention to for babies and older kids, but today we're focusing on babies, to make sure that things are developing and progressing the way that they are. So if they're not, we can seek intervention and guidance to help them get to where they need to be. And I'm going to talk about that in this episode as well. So I want to ground ourselves in this notion, in understanding that speech is related to the sounds that we make, and language is how we understand and use those sounds to communicate. So when we talk about speech and language development, we're talking about the sounds that our babies are making. We're talking about the language piece, how they're understanding what's being said to them, and then how they use the sounds that they are developing to communicate, to get their needs and wants met. And for babies, they are learning both of these things, speech and language, from the very moment they are born. If you've sat in a room with a baby for even a very short amount of time, you know when they get hungry, what do? They cry. That is a form of communication. They don't have the words to say, I'm hungry. So they cry to let you know, I'm hungry. Maybe they cry to let you know their diaper's wet. Maybe they cry to let you know they're uncomfortable. But whatever the cry is, it gets your attention. And then you start to figure out what the need is. But the babies are using that communication as language. So thinking about it that way. Eye contact, another really great form of communication. Babies are using that as well. Even as they get closer to 12 months of age, eye contact is really important. We have some neurodivergent babies out there that maybe are not using eye contact in what I'll quote and unquote say the typical way, but we do look at eye contact to give us some markers. Babies are looking at the person who's talking to them. Are they looking at you from across the room to get your attention? Do their eyes light up when they see you if you're a familiar face to the baby? We are reading that eye contact as a form of communication for babies too. So if you're waiting for words from your child to really start paying attention as far as whether they're developing or not, I'm here to tell you you're already too late because so much is happening before they ever speak their first words, which I know is an amazing milestone. I have friends, I have coworkers that of course, they know my background as a speech language pathologist. And so they come and they're like, oh, my baby said their first word. And it's a celebratory moment for sure. But if we're waiting until that happens to really start paying attention to what's going on with the speech and language development, we're already behind. So I want to break this down in a way that feels really easy to track. So we're going to start with 0 to 3 months. So birth to 3 months of age. So at this stage, babies are crying to communicate their needs. They're making those cooing sounds like ooh, ah. They're starting to smile, maybe socially. If you come to them with a great big smile and you're, oh, we make the baby voice when we're talking to them, then maybe they reciprocate that smile. Maybe it's a spontaneous smile. They're also at this stage reacting to voices and sounds as well. So if someone comes in with a really loud voice or there's a really loud sound, you'll see them startle. Maybe they start to cry. But that is a marker in their development of perceiving, loud, unfamiliar sounds to cause a reaction. And so that's all a part of that cause and effect that I'll talk about in a little bit as well. But what you want to look for in this age range, 0 to 3 months, are they calming to your voice? Are they beginning to make little sounds back? So if you say, hi, hi, are they trying to say something back? Maybe they don't, accurately imitate what you're saying, but are they opening their mouth to just make a I, some type of sound to see if they are, reciprocating what you're saying? Because that lets you know they're hearing what you're saying. They're picking up on this cause and effect. She says something or he says something, and I can say something too, and playing with their voice. They're realizing their voice in at this age range. So definitely something to pay attention to for that from that 0 to 3 months of age. And again, remember, there's no magic that happens at any of these age ranges that I'm giving you. That if, by the end of their third month of life, if they aren't smiling, then you should rush them to the pediatrician and voice your concerns. I don't want to cause a sense of panic or fear. These are things to look for to see if they're developing and take note of when they develop. Maybe you just jot a quick note in your phone. Maybe you have a journal and you write the things down, but taking note of the things that I'm going to talk about today is going to be really important information to share with your pediatrician should you ever need to communicate some concerns, because they're going to ask you, okay, well, when did you first start to notice this, that it wasn't happening? And you need to be able to say that. Okay, so for ages 4 to 6 months, it gets a little more fun. Now they're doing a little bit more, they're younger. It's like a lot of sleep, eat, poop, repeat. So at this 4 to 6 month range, that's when babbling begins. So you might hear them saying ba ba ba, da 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 da, mama mama, and hello. First words right there. You might hear them laughing more or squealing when they get excited. They might be responding to tone of voice. So if you come with a high pitch, happy voice, or maybe you're talking to a sibling of theirs, and maybe you're getting stern with them, the baby is responding to that type of voice too. And then they're taking turns making sounds. Remember, we talked about that starting to develop at ages 0 to 3 months, and now 4 to 6 months, maybe starts to become a little bit more familiar and common for you to say, mama, mama. And then maybe they start to just put their lips together, just make a ma sound. And that is that reciprocal communication that we do every day as adults. We speak, then the other person speaks. And so your child is demonstrating understanding of that. This is the glimpse of that conversation that will come later when they're talking so much that you wish that they would just take a break from talking. I don't know. I hear that a lot from parents too. All right. So for that 7 to 9 month range, this is where we see them responding to their name because they're hearing it, or they should be. And I'm going to talk about that in the practical ways that you can interact through play with your child. They're responding to their name because it's very familiar to them. They're understanding simple words like no or bye bye, right? Now at this age, they might be crawling towards something that they don't need to get to. And you say no, and they're understanding, I need to stop. and look to mom, look to dad, whoever the caregiver is, daycare worker. They're also responding to simple words like bye bye. Maybe they start to wave with the whole hand. Maybe they start to try to say bye bye. They're using sounds too at this age range from 7 to 9 months to get attention as well. So before, when they were younger, 0 to 3 months, they were using crying to get attention. Now they might start using sounds. It might be just a high pitched scream or sorts, but they're using sounds now to get attention, not relying on crying to get the attention. All related to that sense of awareness of their voice developing. And then they're beginning to use gestures like reaching their arms up or raising their arms up, which lets the adult know they want to be picked up. Or maybe they reach towards an object that they see on the floor. It lets the adult know that they are wanting that. So communication is becoming more intentional at this 7 to 9 month range than maybe it was previously. Now, 10 to 12 months. This is really kind of like the sweet spot for me as a speech language pathologist, just because, things are really, really starting to connect. Their first words are starting to emerge. They're imitating sounds more readily, more consistently. They're using gestures like they're pointing to things that they want. If there's a familiar snack that they want on a table, they're pointing up to it to let you know that they want it. They're waving more now. Maybe the whole hand wave is now turning into just the four fingers waving, or maybe they're moving their elbow and shoulder side to side to move their hand. And then they're understanding simple directions like come here. Thinking about these milestone markers, first words, imitating sounds, pointing, waving, responding to simple directions, think about how those things relate to what they're expected to do in kindergarten, right? All roads lead to kindergarten, the child's first experience with school. They're going to need to have words to communicate, right? They're going to need to imitate sounds as they learn letter sounds, right? They're going to need to learn how to use gestures, perhaps to let a teacher know that they want something that maybe they don't have the word in their vocabulary for at that time. Maybe they are wanting to use gestures to talk with a friend and let them know they don't like something, but they don't have those words in their vocabulary. In kindergarten, they might also, I'm sorry, not might, they are definitely going to need to understand simple directions. And so these things are all really developing nicely and solidly throughout this 10 to 12 month range. So, what I also want to share is that in this stage, this range, words may come, but understanding comes first. Know that kids are like sponges, even as babies. They are soaking up everything that they're hearing, everything. And so that understanding is going to develop first. We call that receptive language. That is going to come first. It's like you're planting little seeds. The more you talk to them, the more you say their name, the more you model things for them, they are soaking it all up. And so the words may come, but the understanding is going to happen first, which is so important because now I'm going to talk about what parents and even daycare workers can do that you need to be doing daily. That's really practical. And it gives it grounds the child in that reality of what communication looks like using their speech and language skills. So I want to bring this into your everyday life. You do not need fancy tools. I know there's a lot of fun things out there on Amazon and in the stores that, say they promote, talking, communication, all these things. You don't need to buy expensive toys. You don't need those things to help your child develop their speech and language skills. What you do need is interaction. Remember, we're not just talking at our kids, we're talking with them, right? They need interaction. And so, yes, that takes time to do that. But I'm going to talk about some ways that you can just do it throughout your everyday routine. And so, here's what that kind of looks like, something that I say to parents all the time: talk all day long, narrate their life. There are things that are going on every day that you can narrate. And that is, remember, the understanding comes first. That is planting the seeds in their brains so that those words are becoming more familiar. And then when the words do come, now they have a vocabulary that's been built up because you're narrating their day. What am I talking about? So every day, kids are, you know, getting their bath, putting clothes on, eating, getting in the car. These are things that you can narrate all day. For example, mommy's making your bottle. Here's your bottle. Get in the bottle warm. We're putting on your socks. Or my kid liked to always take his socks off when he was a baby. So, oops, your sock is gone. Let's get your sock. Now, in all of these instances, you could very well warm the bottle, put the sock on, or find the sock and never say one word, right? Because I feel like some parents just feel like the baby is just there, and then you need to focus on getting the things ready for the baby, which is very important. But if you can narrate what you're doing, you're planting those seeds in your baby's mind. They're hearing that language. And there's research out there to support that a child needs to hear a word 500 times before it becomes a part of their vocabulary. Think about that for a minute. 500 times they need to hear a word before it becomes part of their lexicon, they're part of their vocabulary. So narrating their day is one of the easiest ways for you to get so much bang for your buck being your time. You don't need to go spend money on fancy toys. Narrate their day. Narrate everything that's happening for them. At the daycare, same thing. You're narrating their day. Those things become familiar, right? They're part of their routine. So you are planting the seeds of those words every single time that you say them. And so then that is being stored. And later it becomes that expressive language piece. And then that's when the speech sounds are also being used as well. Make sure that you get face to face, not narrating their day all day long, looking right at them. But another way to stimulate speech and language production is get face to face because they learn from watching your mouth. Let them see how the sounds are made, right? You're in front of them. You're saying, mama, 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 or maybe it's dada, dad, whatever the word is, baba, for bottle, whatever. But make sure that you're getting face to face with them so they can see that your mouth is opening, it's closing. I'm pushing my lips together. I'm pushing my lips out. Whatever the sounds may be, they need to see how those sounds are made. Very important. So if you can, use maybe you just have a couple of minutes after work, in between bath and going to bed, and you can get that face to face time with them to help them see how sounds are made, that's going to be super important. And that's just not for older babies. Start these things that I am sharing with you today, these practical ways to promote speech and language development right from the jump. You may think that the baby just sleep, eat, poop, repeat, and nothing is happening. Things are happening. So start out narrating that their day, start out getting that face-to-face time and the rest of these things I'm going to share with you, because then it becomes a part of your routine. Now it is ingrained in you to do these things because you've been doing them from the very beginning when your baby was maybe 3 months old. So now as they get older, it's become a habit for you. Instead of waiting until they're 10 to 12 months old, now, okay, now I'll narrate their day. Don't wait. Do not wait. That'll be a recurring theme that you hear. Another great practical thing you can do is pause and wait. Saying something, then giving them the space to respond, even if it's just a sound. Pause and wait. That wait time is so important. It is giving them time to process what they've heard and figure out what to do with it. Am I just receiving it and holding on to it? Do I want to try to make a sound now to match what this adult has made? That wait time, that pause is so important, because if we're constantly giving words, constantly prompting, constantly, getting that face to face, mama, 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 dad, 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 baba, baba, and you're constantly going, you're not giving any pause. So your kid's being overstimulated. They don't have time to process what you're saying. So maybe say, mama, mama, and then maybe pause for a little bit. See what they're going to do with it. Are they going to try to make the sound? Or are they just going to sit there and look at you? If they just sit there and look at you, that's totally fine. But give them that opportunity and that pause to show you what they can do. Another great thing to do is repeat and expand. So like if your baby says, wow, right? That's a typical abbreviation for water from little kids. So they may say Wawa, which is great. We give them credit for saying the speech sounds. Excellent. Celebrate them. And then you're going to repeat it and you're going to expand it because Wawa is not how we refer to water as they get older. Wawa, I lived in Virginia for a while. It's a very nice gas station chain up north, but it doesn't mean Wawa to everyone. So repeat and expand. So in that example, if your baby says Wawa, right? You say, yes, Wawa, water, water. You're connecting with them that this phrase, these two little sounds they try to put together, actually sound like this whole word. And that's going to be so important. Remember, you're making connections, you're planting seeds. Super important. Songs and nursery rhymes. Super duper easy. If your kid loves Wheels on the Bus, I know my son did when he was younger, he could listen to it on repeat on YouTube Kids. I'm not anti screen time. You do what's best for your kid, but you do need to have that interaction with them and it needs to come from you. But screen time is perfectly fine. If you're singing the songs yourself, more power to you. But repetition builds memory and language patterns. So if there is a song that your kid loves and you are completely over it because you heard it 1,000 times, keep listening to it. That repetition is building up memory. It's forming those language patterns that they are going to need that will serve them as they get older. Sing the songs in the car. Sing the songs with them if their songs are on the tablet. Sing the songs to them while you're getting that face-to-face time so they can see how the sounds are being made as well. And then reading. There's so much research that supports literacy and the connection to speech and language development. All you need to do is just type that into Google, literacy and speech and language development. You'll get so much information, it might be overwhelming. But reading to them daily, even as young as 2 months old, it's not about the story, right? They're 2 months old. They're not going to remember whatever, Goldilocks or Goodnight Moon, whatever it is. It's about the exposure. Remember, hearing a word at least 500 times is what research has shown for a child to be able to have that word as part of their vocabulary that they can use later. So the younger, the better. It gets them into this habit of expecting to hear this story. You don't need to change the book every day. Remember, repetition is great. Read the same book for a week. Expose them to the words, expose them to the rise and fall of your voice when certain characters talk or certain events happen in the story. It is going to form this expectation from them of having this book read, and it forms a habit for you when you start it while they're younger. It can be, some of the books for babies are squishy, they're made out of material. It can be something as simple as that. It is about the exposure. So just continue to think about that. That exposure is key. And for my daycare providers, this is your moment too. This age range is when moms and dads are dropping their kids off with you for upwards of 8 hours or more a day. And so you are really critical in the early language development. And I'm going to share some ways how I feel like you can support babies that are in your care. Of course, creating those language rich routines, talking through all of it, the diapering, the feeding, the transitions, using consistent songs and phrases, because remember, babies learn through song and repetition, and they learn through repetition. So using those songs and phrases is going to be very helpful. Get on their level. That eye contact, that face to face, so they can see how sounds are being made is key. Limit passive time. So less just swinging on the swing, which is great for calming babies that may be in a more escalated state, but they need more interaction. And I know it can be hard because sometimes there's a lot of babies in the room and they all have needs, and sometimes happens at the same exact time. But once you get past that moment, having more interaction with them is going to be super important. And as a parent, you can even ask about that when you're, thinking about which daycare to choose. How do you all interact with the baby? See what their response is to kind of give you insight into how they see speech and language development in babies. Because I'll tell you, a lot of times people just feel like babies are babies until they get about 6, 8 months old. Nobody's really paying attention to that speech and language development because we're thinking about the expression, we're thinking about words. When they're little, they are still communicating and they are still receiving and processing the information that you're sharing. Daycare workers also encouraging turn taking. That's that conversational turn taking, even babbling back and forth. That counts. You know of a sound or a word that is consistently being said throughout the day. Maybe you start with baba, baba, give that wait time, see if they give it back. Maybe the first day they don't. They're looking at you like, what is this woman doing? But they can start to catch on as you continue with that consistency. And then communicate with parents. This is so important. Share what you're seeing. Just saying, so and so had a great day. They had this many wet diapers, they drank this much milk. That's very important. But share what you're seeing. And the only way you can share what you're seeing is to know what you're looking for, right? So being sure that you are understanding what the developmental milestones of birth to 12 months old are. And then that way you can communicate any progress or concerns, because parents really do look to you to be kind of that guide. If you think about it, you're spending a great deal of time with their child 5 days a week in most cases. And so they're looking to you to give that insight and that input as well. So if you're thinking of what are some play-based ways to build language, I love to keep it simple and fun. Simple and fun. Peekaboo teaches great anticipation. It teaches social interaction. Patty cake builds rhythm and imitation as well. Think about cause and effect toys. Like, you do something because you want something to happen. So like the old school kind of Jack in the Box where you crank the little thing and you pop, the thing will pop out. That's cause and effect. I'm doing this, and the effect is this thing pops out. So that cause and effect is going to be super important, because that is a life learned skill that they will be served well by if they've developed it. And I'm sorry, are continuing to develop it as they get into kindergarten. Remember, all roads lead to getting your child ready for school. Plain and simple. You'll hear me come back to that many times, because getting our kids ready for kindergarten is not just about whether they can write their name, count to 100, and do some simple math. If they haven't developed basic speech and language skills, you're already behind the eight ball. School is more than just the academic piece. So you'll hear me say that many times on Tuesday Talks for sure. Um, Mirror play. Babies watching their own mouths move. Put them in front of a mirror. If it's something that could be propped up on the floor, maybe have a big mirror in your bathroom, maybe have the taller mirror that you have in your bedroom to look at yourself after you get dressed. Hold them. Hold them up. You're both in the mirror. Let them watch themselves try to make those sounds so they can see what their own mouths are doing. They see it, they feel it, they can repeat it. And then lastly, pointing and naming, labeling everything around them. If you remember, like the Color Purple movie, they're going around labeling everything in the house as she's learning how to read. That's super important. We're not teaching babies how to read, but we do want them to know what common objects are named. So, here's your ball instead of just giving them the ball. Here's your book instead of just giving them the book. Ready for your bottle instead of just giving them the bottle. Labeling things and incorporating that as part of your narration will really go a long way, because play is not extra. Play-based learning should be happening birth all the way through, in my personal opinion, because even as an adult, I learn some things better through play than I do just reading a manual or something like that, right? Play is an extra. Play is the work. Interacting with your baby is an extra. That is the work, right? So making sure you're being really intentional about those interactions is going to be super duper helpful. All right, so when to be concerned, because this is very important. We're tracking our milestones for our baby. We need to know when we need to be concerned. Remember, I said there's no magic that happens when a kid turns 6 months old and now they just magically start to do all of the things that I talked about earlier. It doesn't happen that way. We need to give babies time. We give kids time. We give adults time. Same thing for babies. So I want to talk about the part that a lot of times people avoid, and that is voicing concerns, because we want to see our child through rose-colored glasses. Everything's great. We don't want to, anticipate something that maybe won't even come to fruition. We don't want to, become anxious about things, but There are times when you should pause and say, I need to talk to my child's pediatrician about this. And so be really mindful if around 3 to 4 months your baby isn't making any sounds. They're radio silent aside from crying. That can, be an indicator that maybe their speech and language development is not developing as it should be. Maybe 6 to 7 months, they aren't babbling yet. That ba ba ma 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 ba, playing with their voice. They're not doing that at that 6 to 7 month range. Not responding to their name by 9 months. If their back is to you, or they're, seated in their swing, or whatever activity that they're doing, and you're calling their name and they're not responding to you. That could be an indicator of hearing issues. It could also be an indicator of them just not being aware that my name's being called and this is what I need to do. Remember, cause and effect, very important. Um, Also, like by 12 months, if they're not using any gestures like pointing or waving, maybe you just haven't modeled it enough. Maybe they haven't seen it enough. But if by 12 months they're not doing it at all, that's the key word. They're not doing it at all. That's when you really want to bring it to your pediatrician's attention. If they're occasionally waving, I think that's perfectly fine, because sometimes you feel like waving, sometimes you don't, even as a baby. So think about these things in a way that they're not happening, not that inconsistently happening. Those are two different things, right? Inconsistently happening is different from not happening at all. So the things that I'm talking about now, they're not happening at all. They're not making sounds by age 3 to 4 months. They're not babbling by age 6 to 7 months. They're not responding to their name by age 9 months. They're not using gestures like pointing or waving by 12 months of age. They don't seem to hear or respond to sounds. Maybe they just have limited interaction. These are all things to mention to your pediatrician. If you've written down some of the instances where you try to imitate some words or sounds and didn't get anything, and you're still not getting any, imitation back, that's something to kind of be able to share with the pediatrician as well. But the key here is don't just wait and see what happens. Please don't just wait to see what happens. I know it takes a level of acceptance for us to feel like, okay, I'm accepting that perhaps there's something going on with my kid. Let me ask the pediatrician. Don't let your pride or ego get in the way of your child getting services that they may need. And that has to start with a conversation with their pediatrician. Early support makes a big, big difference, huge difference. So come to that level of comfortability that you can talk with your kid's pediatrician to voice your concerns. And if you feel like you're getting brushed off or rushed out of the office, go back to some of those developmental milestones that I just mentioned in this week's episode and share those with the pediatrician. Well, I read or I heard the kid should be doing this between this age range, and my kid isn't doing it. We have to advocate for our kids. We can't just rely on others to take it as seriously as we take it. But if your child isn't doing those things that I mentioned, that is, you know, the basis for a conversation with the pediatrician for sure. So today we talked about how speech and language start long before the first words. Remember, if you're waiting for first words to start imprinting and putting information into their receptive language reservoir, you're already behind the game. We walked through some milestones from birth to 12 months of age, and you got some really practical, easy ways to support your baby's speech and language development every day through play. And here's what I want you to really walk away with. You don't need perfection. You don't need perfection. You need persistence. Let me say that again. You don't need perfection. You need persistence. Your voice, your face, your interactions. That is your baby's first classroom. Remember, we talked about all roads lead to kindergarten, but your interaction, your face, your voice, that is your baby's first classroom. And if you have concerns, you have to speak up. You have to ask questions. You have to kind of push back on something that just doesn't line up with what your research and what you have learned to be true. Talk to your pediatrician, because when it comes to development, earlier is always better. And if your child needs services, the earlier they get them, the better. So thank you so much for joining me for another Tuesday Talks this week. Share this episode with another mom friend, another daycare worker, anyone who has a baby in their life so that they know what to look for and they know how to pour into the baby as well when you're looking at developing their speech and language communication. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Be sure to share this episode and join me next week for a brand new Tuesday Talks. See ya.